Reyna asked me to be brief. I'll try to do so. I've known her since infancy, from Hanabata days. In fact, I'm her godfather. She attended school in Hawaii and high school here, went to Vancouver for college, and ended up studying law at Seattle University. In Vancouver, she also worked with homeless people and did research um, and other things in her spare time. And in Seattle, and taking up law, she also had time to work on getting Seattle to pass a wage theft ordinance, which increased penalties for employers who cheat employees of their fair pay. She was so outstanding at Seattle University. They gave her a 2-year fellowship to Rochester, New York, where she worked. Let's see, for the Empire Justice Center for, I believe, at least 2 years. At the university, she was in a program called Scholars for Justice, and she certainly lived up to her the title of that program and excelled. So I'm delighted that wage theft is really one of the key issues she worked on, both in Seattle, I think, in Vancouver, but also in Rochester. So Reyna, mahalo for being willing to talk to us tonight.
Thank you, Uncle. I don't know where you got all that information, but wow, you have a great memory.
I have the GA.
Don't believe anything he says. He has trouble being short and brief, but yes, thank you. Mahalo for having me today. I'm super excited to be here. I'm so excited that you guys have organized Hawai'i Workers Center. It's been a long time dream of so many people, and just really excited to see it getting kicked off. And especially, in the pandemic, like so many workers are suffering, but also resilient, and can really use a worker center to support them. So just very inspired by all of you. Um, so yeah, I kind of, got into workers' rights because my mom is an immigrant to Hawaii, and, I grew up hearing her stories of experiencing discrimination and abuse at the workplace. And that's really what led me into law and focusing on worker and immigrant workers' rights. Just to clarify to everyone, I'm not actively practicing law anymore. I've kind of shifted my focus. So none of this is legal advice and should be taken as legal advice. I had to brush up on a lot of things. So please bear with me today. So just generally about wage theft, it's basically when an employer doesn't pay you for what you're owed for your work. And wage theft is really an epidemic, particularly in low wage industries, as you all probably are very aware. There's been studies that have been done that show that 26% of low wage workers are not paid the minimum wage. Over 76% of low wage workers are not paid overtime. And based on this study in 3 different cities, $56.4 million in wages were lost per week. And so it really is such an important issue. There's not a lot of enforcement going on. And so it's really on places like worker centers to educate and activate people in exercising their rights. Wage theft causes families to fall into poverty. It affects local economies. They're weakened. Good employers who are paying their workers and treating them well, they can't compete with employers who are cheating workers. And so it sort of creates this race to the bottom type of economy. And then payroll taxes, for government programs are lost as well. So I'm just going to jump right into some of the basic rights. Next slide, please. So if anyone wants to jump in, who knows what the minimum wage in Hawaii is?
10.10.
10.10, that's correct. It's 10.10 an hour. And who knows what the federal minimum wage is? You can chat it or you can unmute yourself.
Is it 725 or 750?
725, that's
Right.
correct. So yeah, it's so interesting, like seeing all of your introductions in the chat box, because we can see wages have not gone up very much at all over the years. So kudos to everyone who's on the call that has been fighting for a living wage, because minimum wage just doesn't cut it for working families in Hawaii and all across the country. So minimum wage is 10.10, federal minimum wage is 7.25, and this applies whether you're paid by the day, by the job, by piece rate, you know, if you're making or producing things. Just in general, your average hourly wage has to be at least the minimum wage. Next slide. Overtime. So does anyone know what the overtime rate is? Someone who hasn't spoken yet. Maybe I should open up this chat box. Having trouble seeing. Time and a half. Yes, Yoko. So yes, time and a half. So time and a half after how many hours in a week? 40. That's right. So you can go to the next slide. So if you work over 40 hours a week, you have to be paid 1.5 times your hourly wage for every hour that you work over 40. So that's just something basic to remember. And again, there's so many low wage workers that aren't being paid their overtime. Next slide. So tips. So there's actually specific regulations regarding tips. So the minimum wage is 10.10. Employers can take a tip credit of 75 cents an hour, which means that the tipped minimum wage can be as low as 9.35 an hour. So the rule is a little bit complicated. And also, as I'm sharing, like if you want to write down notes and things, because we're going to do a little bit of an activity at the end. So yeah, that's just something that you might want to do. So tipped minimum wage is 9.35 an hour, and employers can only take the maximum tip credit if minimum wage plus tips is $7 more than the actual minimum wage. Sorry, tipped minimum wage plus your tips. So that's 17.10 an hour. It's a bit of a nightmare doing the math, but there you go. That's what the statute says. A lot of, particularly in food service, but in other industries as well, the employers will implement tip splitting or tip pooling. And so for cases like that, the amount that you actually get, an employee actually gets, is considered their tips. And a lot of times employees will work more than one job. And so for us, the same employer. And so a tip credit can only be taken for those hours where you are earning more than $20 a month in tips, if that makes sense. So sometimes you're maybe doing a job that is a tips job, and sometimes maybe not, you know, like a dishwasher versus a server, depending on the day. So that's important to remember. Next slide. So what is considered work, and when do you need to be paid for it? So time that is suffered or permitted by the employer is work time, and it must be paid, even if it's not requested. So, you know, it seems to make a lot of sense, but a lot of employers, again, like this is part of their business model, is shaving off time from workers' paycheck. So an employee can voluntarily continue work at the end of their shift. They can finish a task that they were assigned. They can fix errors in their work. They might be prepping time reports or other records for the employer after they're done with their job. All of that time is for the benefit of the employer, and it needs to be paid. So if the employer has reason to believe or knows that the employee is continuing to work and is getting the benefit of the employee's work, then it should be paid. It doesn't matter if it's past their shift or not. It doesn't matter if they've clocked out and they continue working after 30 minutes after to do an additional task. That time is work time and it should be paid. Next slide. So waiting time. So the rule about waiting time is if you're waiting to be engaged, then it's not work and you don't need to be paid for it. In order for you to fall into this category, you have to be completely relieved from all of your duties. You have to know that you can leave the job. And if you're expected to come back, you have to know what time you're supposed to come back. And then in order for wait time to be considered work time, where you have to be paid for it, you're basically engaged to wait. And what this time usually looks like is it's unpredictable, it's a very short time. You can't use the time for your own purposes, and it's really controlled by the employer, and the employer gets the benefit of you waiting. And it's really times where waiting is actually a part of your job. So, a worker waiting at a temp agency for a job placement, for example, they don't need to be paid. But let's say an assistant at a construction site who has to run errands, but who's waiting for an assignment, they are engaged to wait, and the employer is benefiting from them waiting. That's a part of their job. And so that time needs to be paid. A receptionist who's reading a book while waiting to get a phone call, a truck driver who's waiting for his truck to be loaded, a messenger who's doing a crossword puzzle while they wait for an assignment. All of that wait time is considered work time and should be paid. Next slide. On-call time. So much in wage law has changed with cell phones and technology, and it makes for a lot of really interesting questions in wage law. But basically, if you are required to remain at your job site or close to your job site, it's probably going to be considered work time and needs to be paid. If you can be at home, if you have flexibility to leave a message about where you can be reached, that's not going to be considered work time because you can actually use that time for your own purposes. But, the real question is, how much is your time limited by the employer? How much is your freedom limited by the employer? That's really going to determine whether your on-call time is work time or not. Next slide. Rest and meal periods. So rest breaks, for coffee or snack, a bathroom break are usually of short duration and they need to be paid. It's considered work time. Meal periods that are for a designated time, usually this is, 30 minutes or more, don't have to be paid by the employer. An employee is working if she's required to perform any duties while eating. So an office employee who has to eat at their desk because they're expected to answer a call, or a factory worker who has to be at his machine while they eat, is still working. And so that time does need to be paid. The interesting thing about Hawaii is we actually don't have a mandatory break or meal requirement, which is really strange. And if the Worker Center wants to take on any kinds of passing new policy and new law, maybe that's something that you want to look into, but that's pretty unique for Hawaii, although most employers in Hawaii do allow for rest and meal periods, but it's not required. Next slide. Training and meeting time. So if your training or meeting time is mandatory and related to your job, it has to be paid. Generally speaking, it's not going to be considered work, and it doesn't have to be paid if it's outside your normal hours, if it's completely voluntary, if it's not related to your job, and you're not performing any other job duties at the same time. So training and meeting time includes training, shadowing, seminars, lectures, staff meetings. All of these things count as work time and they need to be paid. Next slide. Travel time. So time spent traveling during work for the benefit of the employer needs to be paid. So travel from home to your workplace is not considered work. Travel from work to your home is not considered work. But if you're traveling from job site to job site, all of that travel time in between is considered work, and you do need to be paid for it. So let's say a worker is required to report at a meeting place and get instructions, or do some work there, or pick up tools and supplies there. Then they have to travel to a place of work where they're actually doing the work. It's a part of their day's work. All of that has to be counted as work hours. Let's say that you normally finish your workday at 5 p.m. at your workplace, but then your employer says, oh, we have another job site and they need help, and so you need to go there, and then you finish at 8 p.m. And then the employer wants you to drop off tools at the main work office site. Basically, all of the travel time between those three sites are considered work time and do need to be paid. Next slide, please. Illegal deductions. So an employer can't deduct or withhold from your wages unless it's required by law or by a court order. So like taxes, child support orders, or if the worker agrees in writing and it's for their benefit, not the employer's benefit. Next slide. So a lot of things that employers will try to deduct wages for: fines, cash shortages in a shared or common cash register, penalties or replacement for breakage of tools, losses due to faulty workmanship, lost or stolen property, damage to property, non-payment for goods or services. All of these things are going to be considered illegal deductions. They shouldn't be taken out of your pay unless they're willful and intentional on the part of the employee. The employee is trying to hurt their employer and steal something or deliberately harm them, then it's not going to be an illegal deduction. But for all of these other reasons, it will be. In addition, wage law in Hawaii says that you can't be charged for a medical or physical exam for an employee or even a prospective employee, so an applicant to a job, if it's required by the employer or by law. In Hawaii, you also can't charge for job application processing fees. Those are illegal here. And uniforms, if they're required by the employer, those need to be paid for by the employer, not the employee. So these are all ways that workers can suffer wage theft. They're very important to remember. Next slide. Payment of wages. So your paydays have to be set days 2 times a month on regular paydays. They need to be set in advance, and you can be paid by cash, check, direct deposit, or pay card. But there's a ton of regulations around being paid by pay card. So I would just if you come across a worker that is being paid this way, there's just going to be a lot of red flags, and you're going to have to read the statute very closely. I think for a while it was a very common way to pay employees, but pay card companies were charging illegal fees, and these were cutting into workers' wages, getting charged fines for overdrafts and things like that. So pay cards are something to definitely look out for. Sorry, there's a question here. Let me see if I can open it. If a worker is overpaid, can an employer deduct overpayment from one check, or are there limits? I think for overpayments, it's probably fine, but if there's like a valid dispute between the employer and the employee, I guess the employer just pays what they think they owe, and then they take the risk of, underpaying somebody and suffering penalties and damages later on. But I don't think that they're prevented from deducting for overpayment. Good question. And then questions about, when you end or terminate your employment. All right, Teddy, please jump in and share your mana'o with everyone. Teddy's gonna jump in at the end of my presentation to share a little bit about the U.S. Department of Labor, I think is who he works for, and about their claims process as well. So yeah, if you're discharged, you have to be paid the next working day. So if you're fired, if you quit, you have to be paid the next regular pay day. And if you give one pay period notice before you quit, then you have to be paid on your last day. So those are just some minor things about when you can expect to be paid. Next slide. Pay stubs and records. So you have to get a notice at the time that you're hired of the rate of pay, day that you expect that you're going to be paid, and location. That's probably just something that's old in a statute because most people don't get have a physical place where they're paid anymore. They have to be notified in writing of vacation and sick leave policies, and your pay stub needs to include all of these things: the employer's name, the employee's name, your pay period, your gross compensation, the amount and the purpose of every deduction in your paycheck, your net pay, and date of payment. This might seem obvious for those of us that have worked, I guess, pretty regulated jobs, but for lots of employees that work under the table, that are day laborers, they never get pay stubs. They never get any of these records. So it's important for them to keep their own records. So a lot of things that we take for granted, I think, in our own work experiences, a lot of workers actually, these are not things that they expect from their employer. And then the employer has to maintain payroll records for 6 years in Hawaii. Next slide. Retaliation. So it's important for workers to know that, when they exercise their rights, their wage and hour rights, that they can't be retaliated against. Again, this doesn't stop employers from retaliating. We know retaliation does happen very regularly, and it's one of the main reasons why workers don't speak up. But by the law, they can't discharge you, discriminate against, or retaliate against you for exercising your wage and hour rights. And protected activity, exercising your rights, this can include complaining to your employer, filing a claim with the Department of Labor, or complaining to any other person. All of those are protected activities. Also filing a lawsuit, testifying in any investigation, or any other way that you exercise your rights. All of this, the employer can't retaliate against you. And, the next slide, what constitutes retaliation? Retaliation happens in a whole number of different ways. Reducing your hours, reducing your pay, demoting or transferring you to a less desirable job, making your work schedule more difficult, verbal or physical abuse, or firing you. So all of these things, and because of lack of enforcement, it makes it really hard for workers to feel like they can speak up on the job. Next slide. Undocumented workers' rights. So a lot of people don't realize that wage and hour laws and many employment laws actually apply to all workers regardless of their immigration status. So even though undocumented workers don't have the legal work authorization to work, once they do perform work for an employer here, they are entitled to be paid for that work. And the policy reason behind that is really just, our government doesn't want employers to be taking advantage of undocumented workers and benefiting from unpaid work. So if they work a day, they need to be paid for a day. Courts more recently have become very conservative about interpreting how undocumented workers' rights play out in court, specifically related to the kinds of damages that they can collect. So there was one case that said that if an employee is fired, that they can't get back pay for the time that they would have worked but didn't actually work for that employer because they don't have legal work authorization. So that was one case. There is one other case also, and basically the interpretation is if an employer knowingly hires an undocumented worker, or if the employer discovers a worker is undocumented and they continue employing them, then undocumented workers can recover those damages. That was a California case. So, you know, a lot of these things haven't been litigated in Hawaii, but they do influence our jurisdiction. So that's just something to be aware of. But in general, undocumented workers should know that all of the wage and hour laws apply to them regardless of their immigration status. Next slide. So we're gonna talk now about some case studies. And maybe we can ask, I feel like I'm tired of hearing my voice. So does someone else want to read this first case study? We go to the next slide.
I can do this one.
Okay.
Yoko just got hired to work as a server at a restaurant. I was afraid I was going to say as a part-time employee at the Workers Center. Her manager tells her she will be paid $9 per hour. During Yoko's first week of work, she asked to come in 1 hour before each shift to shadow another server before the start of each shift. But she won't be paid for those hours because it's considered training time. During Yoko's first month, she seems to average about $45 in tips for a 6-hour shift. Yoko is disappointed because she thought she would be making more in tips.
So can anyone spot any wage theft violations that you see?
I think the 1 hour pre-shift time is job related and required, so she should be paid for that.
Yes, that's correct. That's training time and she should be getting paid for it. Anything else, folksy?
Is the $9 per hour something that is not correct?
Yeah, that's right. So if she's a tipped employee, she should be getting paid how much? Does anyone remember?
Let's see.
$9.35.
$9.35. That's right. $9.35. You can bring out your calculators because these questions are gonna get harder.
Oh
Anyone else see any other issues here?
Well, I think the average hourly tip she gets is $9. That's kind of small. Oh, yeah. 45 over 6-hour shifts. That's yeah.
Yeah, that's $7.50 an hour.
$7.50 an hour, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So employers can take the maximum tip credit only if the employee makes $7 an hour over the minimum wage, which is $17.10 an hour. So what that means is that employees actually have to average $7.75 an hour in tips if the employer is going to take the full tip credit and pay them $9.35 an hour. She's only averaging in tips, so the employer really shouldn't be taking the credit, and they're not even paying her the actual tipped minimum wage. So the funny thing is I hated math and some into wage theft, and I thought I was creating these crazy spreadsheets doing math nonstop, because that's what these cases boil down to. So next slide. If anyone want to read the next case study?
Sergio should read this one.
Sergio?
Hold on. Sergio works as a construction worker for $14 an hour. Sergio works at 2 different job sites, an apartment and a hotel for the same subcontractor. At the apartment, he works Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. At the hotel, he works Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. He is paid $672 a week in cash. Nice. Sometimes Sergio's employer pays him in check if he doesn't have cash, but asks Sergio to wait 14 days to cash the check because the account is low on funds and is waiting for payment from the general contractor. One day, the drill he was using breaks, so his employer withholds $150 from his pay that week because he says it's Sergio's fault, so he has to pay for a replacement. Sergio complains to his employer, saying he should get his full pay and that the drill was just old and it wasn't his fault. The next week, his manager puts out a new schedule and Sergio's only working 4 hours a day instead of 8.
So what are the wage violations that you see?
Retaliation.
Retaliation, that's right. Usually the retaliation cases aren't this clear-cut, but yes, great spotting it. Misty says illegal deduction. I think she's referring to the drill, right, that broke.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else see anything that's a problem? It's going to require...
The delay in paying him?
Yes, that's right. Teddy's giving you the answers, even though he knows all the answers.
I'm still doing the math.
That's right.
He's should be getting paid.
You should be getting paid 8 hours of overtime a week. So yeah, you have to calculate the hours and the days for each of his different shifts. Yeah, I was just going to do that. Bonus points for anyone that can figure out how much he should be getting paid. Right now he's getting paid $6.72 a week.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yes, Mary, that's right. He's having to wait 14 days to cash his check. And, you know, excuses from the employer, it doesn't matter. He needs to be getting paid on time. Yes, Justin, retaliation. Yes. Retaliation for speaking up about the drill and then getting dinged for it. Did anyone figure out how much he's supposed to be getting paid?
Well, he's definitely working one 8-hour shift longer, isn't he?
Yeah. Teddy again. That's right. $728. See, he's practiced in his math because this is what he does all day.
Yeah, I know. Thank you, Teddy. My brain is tired.
Okay, the last case study. Who wants to read it? If we can go to the next slide.
Yoko, I did you. You have to do mine.
Okay. Hotel housekeeper. John works at a hotel in Waikiki. He is paid $10 an hour. John's work schedule is Tuesday through Saturday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. He is required to clean 10 rooms a day, but it takes him about an hour to clean each room, so he ends up working until 6 p.m. almost every day. If John doesn't finish his 10 rooms, he works extra hours because he feels like it's his fault for being slow and not meeting the room quota. He is paid $800 every 2 weeks. On Sundays, John has to come in for an hour-long staff meeting, but he is not paid for that time. A few times a month, he shows up to work and is sent to the Ko'olina Hotel branch because they are short-staffed. He is only allowed to clock in when he arrives at the hotel in Ko'olina, a 45-minute drive away.
Oh my gosh.
Crappy job.
So what are the wage theft violations that you see?
Well, starting for $10 an hour.
Yep, that's right. A hot mess, Mary says. Yeah, we gotta go demonstrate outside this hotel for sure. So minimum wage, yes, he should be getting paid 10.10.
The 2 extra hours of work a day are unpaid. Should be overtime, like Misty said.
Yeah, that's right. 2 hours of overtime every day.
Hmm.
Yeah, this definitely has been a problem. Even with hotel workers now.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's 10 hours of overtime a week.
That's crazy.
Anything else?
And the staff time.
Travel time, Teddy says.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think? If he shows up to Waikiki hotel and then has to be sent to Ko'olina, should he get paid those 45 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. It's from job site to job site, right?
Correct.
I think we...
How about the staff meeting on Sunday?
Yeah.
That should be
Yes,
paid.
that's right. A mandatory staff meeting
Okay.
should be paid. So you guys aced it.
One thing there, though, management will sometimes say we never told him to work the 2 hours, but the law seems to make if they allow it, if it's going on and they don't stop it, they're liable. Is that correct?
That's right. If it's suffered or permitted, and if they get the benefit of it, it's still work time.
Yep. Still compensable time.
So who knows how much he's supposed to get paid either every week or every 2 weeks? Who's figured out the math?
Eddie.
Oh, Misty.
That's right. Well, almost right. $1,111 every 2 weeks.
Ah.
Yeah.
Is that 570 whatever per week?
555.50.
Yeah, I did my math wrong.
Yeah. 10.10 an hour.
It's 10.10 plus an hour on a Sunday.
Uh-huh.
Oh, plus the hour on the Sunday. Did I add that in? I don't think I added it. So it should be more.
It's 570.65 per week.
All right, I'll take your word for it.
Me too.
Right on. Okay.
Very good examples. These are really real life examples, Reyna. Good job.
They are, and I'm sure that, I've seen so many of these cases, and Teddy, I'm sure, can give a lot of great but horrible examples as well. So let's see. Let's go to the next slide. What can we do about it? We're gonna actually watch a short video that I found of another worker center that is addressing wage theft in their community.
Ready for it?
Yes.
Maria Ligero is on her way to demand approximately $600 from Garden Fresh, a small company in Brooklyn, that neglected to pay her for 2 weeks of her work in food preparation.
Hay que ir con la mentalidad de que no es miedo, el miedo es mental, ¿verdad? No hay miedo. Y que uno va a recuperar lo que se le debe.
Aunque ahora digo, no sé si no es que nos hayan cerrado la puerta también. Pero no, porque nadie sabe que estamos yendo.
In the US, wage theft costs workers $50 billion a year. Yes, $50 billion. In New York alone, 2.1 million workers are victims of wage theft annually. They're cheated out of $3.2 billion in wages and benefits. Maria works as a day laborer to support herself and her 4 children. When her employer refused to pay, she reached out to an organization called the Workers' Justice Project.
¿Usted siente que le faltaron al respeto al no pagarle su salario?
Pues yo digo que sí. Él estuvo vendiendo toda su mercancía y él estaba recibiendo los cheques. ¿Por qué no nos quiere pagar?
¿Qué razón le daba para que no le pagara?
O bueno, nos hizo trampa porque eso de darnos unos cheques que no tienen fondo.
So the organizers decide to write a letter to demand the outstanding pay. And they decide to deliver the letter personally to Maria's employer.
Yeah, is the owner here though, or the manager?
No.
They're not here? And we're here to deliver a message that there is wages that are owed to Ms. Maria. And we are here in support of her, and we want to make sure that the owner knows.
New York State has some of the strongest wage theft protection laws in the country, but despite this, wage theft is still very pervasive in New York State, and that's because we need stronger enforcement.
And that's what I see in a lot of the day labor cases. These are not complex legal cases because the law is clearly on the worker's side, but it shows how these employers, unscrupulous employers, really don't care about the law.
Mr. O, good afternoon. How are you? I'm Juan Carlos with the Workers Justice Project. I'm with Maria here outside of your business. We're trying to deliver a message to you, but you are not in. I'm wondering if you will be stopping by your workplace today.
What?
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah.
Mr. Cal?
Yes.
Hi, we're here to talk regarding Maria's case.
What's the problem?
She was not paid for her hours that she worked. So we are here as an organization, the Workers Justice Project.
Well, I got a phone call, I got an email. So what's going on here now? What's your corruption here?
They haven't paid.
I understand, but I got an email and I'm talking to someone. Right. I'm not going to tell you what's the problem. She sent me an email yesterday. So what's
She still hasn't gotten paid.
I don't care. Do whatever you want. Goodbye. You can do whatever you want. Be happy. Bye.
When it's time to pay, many employers simply disappear.
And it's often a very systematic part of an employer's business strategy.
And women day laborers are especially vulnerable.
They're often working mainly in isolation, and Maria was only working with one other person. They're also working a lot more sporadically than, let's say, a male day laborer who's doing a construction job.
Fortunately, Maria can provide legal evidence for her case.
We do have some pay records. We do have a set schedule that she followed.
Hora trabajada.
Hora pagada.
Hora trabajada.
Hora pagada.
Queremos.
Que nos paguen.
¿Cuándo?
Ahora.
What is the protest about?
We are demanding that the owner here pays Maria Ligero for her wages. She has worked and she hasn't been paid.
She claims I own her. I have records what I own her. I have no problem paying it. But she thinks that she's going to claim and make all this commotion.
What's the role of the NYPD when it comes to wage theft?
Well, you're going to have to take it to court because this is a civil matter.
In Maria's case, she would need to go to the small claims court because her claim is under $5,000.
And right now in New York City, the small claims court cases are backlogged, and workers are not getting their first hearing for at least 6 months.
And even after Maria wins in court, she will still have to take additional legal steps to go after the employer's assets.
This could take months, years, before she sees these 2 weeks' worth of wages that she's owed, which is absurd.
The organizers try to use Maria's case to create solidarity among the women day laborers in Brooklyn.
Muchas veces les da vergüenza exponer que han sido robadas, pero ya cuando ven a mujeres que de la misma parada que están alzando la voz y que dicen me robaron y estoy exigiendo que me regresen mi salario, ellos van a perder esa vergüenza y van a decir no, por la verdad a mí sí me robaron.
La necesidad de organizarse está ahí. Ahora es cómo lo hacemos, ¿verdad? Porque los patrones, crean o no me crean, están organizados. Y quiero darle la oportunidad a María, por favor, para que nos cuente su historia y pida apoyo de las compañeras.
En una semana son 38 horas y otros 4 días que yo todavía tratando de decir que me pagara, pero no, él no va a pagar.
Pero yo creo que cada trabajador tiene derecho a recibir su pago honradamente.
Aquí estamos y no nos vamos.
The Workers' Justice Project does not stop calling Maria's employer. 1 month after the first confrontation, he finally offers to pay. He tells them to pick up the check at a construction site he oversees.
La dinámica de poder ya cambió bastante. Ya no es tanto que él es el patrón y usted hace lo que dice. Ahora es que están como más nivelados en términos de poder.
66 hours.
66 le va a pagar.
This is 66 hours.
Dice que el lunes lo deposite.
66 hours.
¿Está bien con usted eso?
Aló, Juan Carlos, buen día. Y el dinero está ahí porque estaba verificando adentro del banco.
Qué bien, felicidades.
All right, so that is just an example of what one worker center is doing. And actually a lot of worker centers do these types of actions and campaigns to try to help workers collect their wages, because as they explain, there's not a lot of enforcement and employers just get away with it. So next slide. So, you know, one of the most important things a worker can do is keep really good records. Again, this may not seem like super obvious to those of us that get proper pay stubs, but for contingent, temporary, day laborers, vulnerable workers, this is really important because a lot of them don't get pay stubs. So they have to write down the agreement they have, including their job title, what their pay rate is, what their work schedule is. They have to keep a calendar of their hours and note the time they start and the time that they finish. There is an app that USDOL provides if workers want to keep their timesheets through an app to make it easier for them. If they do get pay stubs, they should keep them and review them. And any contracts, letters, notices, texts, emails from their employer, they should keep as well. And then for day laborers specifically that don't have a lot of information about their employer, you know, take photos of your job site, take pictures of the work that you did perform, take pictures of license plate numbers. This was very common when I was working with a worker center in Seattle that dealt with a lot of day laborers who actually, sometimes they don't even know the name of their employer. And so it's license plate numbers and things like that are helpful in figuring out who owes them their wages. Next slide. Take concerted action. So as you saw in the video, you do have a right, all workers have a right to engage in concerted action for mutual aid or protection. And so my recommendation is usually if you go talk to your employer about a workplace problem, whether it's wage theft, discrimination, any kind of workplace problem, you should go with a coworker or go on behalf of a group of people. The reason for this is because you have this extra layer of protection when you do it on behalf of other folks. So employers are not supposed to interfere with, restrain, or coerce this right. And both union and non-union workers have this right. So, you know, the direct actions you were seeing in the video, all of that is protected, concerted activity, and is protected activity under the law. Next slide. So this is sort of the information that I pulled from Hawaii State Department of Labor and U.S. Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division, our local offices. And I was going to hand it over to Teddy, who is going to share a little bit more about the wage claims process. Teddy?
Okay. Yeah, so my name is Teddy Barboza. I'm from the Wage Standards Division for the state of Hawaii. I'm currently the Investigation Section Supervisor. So first thing everybody needs to know is our services are free. We do not charge. We do not require you to get an attorney. If we have coverage over your claim, we can take it and we will investigate it further. To file a complaint with our office, you can either come in person, or well, not right now, COVID, yeah. Our building is closed to the public, but you could always mail in your complaint forms, and our complaint forms can be found on our website at labor.hawaii.gov. wsd/forms. And you're most likely looking at a Chapter 387 or 388 complaint. Yeah, I don't really know what to talk about until somebody asks me what to talk about.
So can you explain to them like what happens? Like let's say they file a complaint, what would happen after that?
Okay, so once you file a complaint with our office, it goes to our certification branch, and then it'll get assigned to an investigator. The investigator will call you to clarify your allegation, just to make sure you're both on the same page before they make contact with the employer. And the investigation process, we normally request all of your records, your time cards, your payroll records, your employment agreement, your pay arrangement, and your employee handbook to make sure we address every claim or every allegation that you claim has been violated. Investigations can range anywhere from 1 hour all the way up to a year that I've seen. It all depends on how much the employer cooperates.
And then you talk to the employer?
Yes. After we clarify the allegations with you or the claimant, then we'll make contact with the employer or their attorney, and it's usually a big back and forth session from there.
And what happens if you find that there's wage theft? What happens next in your process?
There's two things. So because of COVID, let me just go with the regular thing. So under Chapter 388-10, we would issue an order of wage payment violation. That's normally whatever back wages we find, we impose a penalty towards the employer that's equal to the amount of back wages found due, plus interest, and a minimum $500 penalty that goes to the state. But because of COVID and the court systems are closed or backed up, and the suspension of HRS Chapter 91, which allows hearings and appeals to happen with employers, we have temporarily suspended issuing the penalty for now until EGA gives us the law back. What we can do is get your back wages only for now.
And then so when you issue the order, then you send that to the employee, the worker, and what are they supposed to do with the order?
No, the order goes to the employer, and then they'll have 20 days to pay or appeal the order. If they pay it, it's fine. We pay all the money to the claimant. If they appeal, we go to hearings process, and we'll have the Attorney General make a decision for us. If they don't pay, the order becomes affirmed, and we refer the matter to the Attorney General's for collections.
And Mary's asking, what's the average time to investigate and rule on a complaint? And what powers do you have to enforce a payment?
So our main teeth to enforce was the administrative penalty, to add the penalty equal to the amount of back wages found due, plus the $500 civil penalty and interest. But since that's suspended right now, we don't have much. We can make demand letters and then go court on another route. So there's two routes we take. There's one route where they're allowed to appeal, and then another route where they appear in front of the judge and make their case. Average time for investigations, it all depends on how much the employer cooperates. Because normally we always give deadlines for them to submit more records. Anytime we ask them to provide more information, we give them a new deadline to submit. And it's usually another 7 days. But that process can go long, depending on how good their attorney is.
And in your experience, like, do most employers cooperate and pay if an order is sent to them, or what's sort of, the employers that do comply right away and don't and fight it?
So the law is clear. The other arm that we try to pursue, but we always get shot down, is pursue criminal action. But the criminal division of the AG's office, they require a lot more paperwork, and it takes a lot longer. And I've seen those cases go for 5 years plus. But the way the law is set up and worded is enough for about 90% of the employers to comply. There are that handful that think they're better than everybody, who can skirt the law, but they just don't care. And those are the ones we try to take out the most.
And maybe if you can share, in your experience, what industries do you see wage theft being the most problematic in Hawaii?
The worst industry is the beauty industry. Salons, barbershops, they like to call apprentices. They have a lot of barber apprentices, beauty apprentices, and they like to say that they're interns that shouldn't be paid because they're teaching them a trade or a skill. That's wrong. They need to be paid at least minimum wage for all time worked. Even though they're an apprentice, we view them the same way as we view construction apprentices. They need to be paid for work. Another problem area is the restaurant industry because of the tip credit. You cannot guarantee that each employee will earn at least $7.50 to $7.75 per hour in tips. All employers always take the tip credit thinking they can pay the least, but tips aren't guaranteed to be earned by each employee per hour. Under Chapter 388, there are no higher penalties. All the penalties are the same. The higher penalties will fall under Chapter 104, that's public works, wages and hours of public works. Those are way more stricter penalties, but that's all real niche work for government contracts.
Got a lot of questions coming in.
Yes, I have a question particularly to Terry. We had a case study that I referred to you and asked for your opinion. That case was about a worker at a car repair shop. And he was not paid for a week of his work. His employer is based in Seattle, but his company is here in Oahu. And you said that you cannot do anything because the employer is not based here. So if that is true, how can we rectify that violation?
For all businesses or all employers doing business in Hawaii, they must register with Hawaii's DCCA, and they should also have a local agent address here. The problem that we have with overseas employers or employers not based in Hawaii is we don't have the authority to subpoena them over here. What we can do is issue demand letters and hope they don't appeal, because then that'll just drag the process on a long time. But our other option is once we make a determination, I got to check our files, but we do have reciprocal agreements with other states. If we make a decision here where we find back wages due for the claimant/employee, we can refer that same decision over to another state that we have a reciprocal agreement for, and they'll collect for us.
So there is actually a way to rectify that. But I thought that when, your advice did not give that kind of option. You just said you don't have authority to go after the employer.
Especially right now with COVID and all of the suspension of laws, we lost a lot of a lot of our good laws that enforce employers.
How many claims are you processing a week or a month?
So this month, August, we took in 72 new claims. And of the 72 new claims, we finished 24, and we collected roughly 22,000.
Have you seen like a difference with COVID happening? Do you see that impacting, employers' ability to pay, or how's that dynamic happening?
So one of the big ones we have right now is a spa or a gym. The employer failed to pay every single employee on time. There was 33 employees impacted who were all paid or weren't paid at all for their last paycheck prior to the COVID shutdown. The employer went bankrupt. We can't collect it. There's nothing to collect. That's the worst part about this whole COVID thing.
Yeah, that's a big challenge.
Yeah.
Sergio's asking, what do you see in the care home industry?
The care home industry is really tricky because it's going to come down to the duties test, what kind of work you're actually doing. We do have exemptions for certain types of work, bona fide administrative work, professional executive work. Those in the care home industry that are registered nurses, normally they would be exempt from collecting overtime because of the exemption set by the state and the federal department. But they're still covered by the law and still must be paid on time. What we do see is a lot of the LPNs, CNAs being taken advantage of and not being paid their fair share of overtime.
Mm-hmm.
And also, the problem with care home industries too, if you're a live-in caretaker, there's a lot more rules that govern that too, because now we take into account the cost of lodging, the cost of like rent and all of that, electrical that the employer pays to lodge you in there to take care of whoever they hire you to take care of. Then it gets real tricky. You may think you're owed a lot of back wages, but it offsets a lot with rent and utilities.
Can you give an example of that?
Of the care home?
Particular case, yeah, about the especially the people who are caring, considered as domestic workers.
Yeah. So those people who let's say the client is bedridden, they give them a bath, they feed them, they go shopping for them, run all their errands. I've seen some where they clock in and out and they've done 15 straight hours, but the employer pays them a single piece rate per day, let's say $150 per day. Regardless of what the piece rate is, you have to be paid at least the minimum wage times the amount of hours you work. If the amount of hours you work go over 40 hours in the work week, then you must be compensated the overtime rate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's one of the bigger problems here. But our office, we are complaint-based. So we know there's a lot of violations going on out there, but we have to address the complaints first before we can go out there and do random spot checks.
Yeah, that was actually going to be another question of mine, because I know New York, their Department of Labor did like industry-specific investigations and just went in and pulled the records of like all of these restaurants. I think it was in Ithaca, in partnership with the Workers Center there, and they found like this massive percentage of violations in restaurants. And so because it was a proactive investigation and the employers weren't expecting it, and because they were able to show like this is happening on a systemic, industry level, it got a lot of people interested and aware, and then it really affected that industry specifically because they were able to do it on a more systemic level instead of like responding to individual complaints. I know you guys are probably very short-staffed and under-resourced, but do you think that's something that our State Department of Labor could look into?
We tried to do it via the director's initiative, but we don't have enough bodies to make that happen. Right now, we only have one investigator on Oahu and one investigator on each neighbor island. Normally, we would have 5 here. So we're backed up way over our heads.
Yeah.
What is the reason for that?
We lost a lot of our people to retirements. We couldn't put out the recruitments out because of COVID, and now we're coming up on a hiring freeze and budget cuts.
Are you reporting yearly to a Senate or House committee at the legislature?
Yep. They see all the money we bring in for penalties, but apparently we're not important.
Okay.
What I like with the video that Reyna showed is that it doesn't necessarily, when there's a violation on and some employers are violating the right of the workers, and we have proof of that, we don't need to necessarily go to approach it legally, in legalistic manner. What was shown in that video is that the pressure of the community can actually rectify the situation actually much faster by shaming the employers who are violating, who are in violations. So I think organizing is much more effective that way, but you can take the legal approach if it is not, at the same time that you are doing some actions together. Because as we heard from Terry, it takes a long, long time to resolve an issue.
Well, but I think this works only for smaller businesses, because when you're dealing with big corporations, they really put up a front, and so it's like the challenge with the hotel workers union right now. They're having really problems dealing with the respective owners or groups of owners of each hotel, and they're really frustrated in how to get any kind of response from these folks. So shaming is it might work for smaller companies and for more locally based employers, but when you're dealing with the large corporations and larger situations, that's not going to work. So we need the arm and the enforcement of the government to help.
When it comes to larger employers, the jurisdiction is split. The U.S. Department of Labor, the federal division, they would take over the overtime on that. But we have a rule where if the employer makes $500,000 or more per year, the jurisdiction lies with the federal department. However, the U.S. DOL, the feds, do not have a payment of wages law like the state. So they always refer back all your straight time to the state. All your overtime that is unpaid, we cannot collect it. The federal department has to collect it. But for big corporations, for the most part, if it's individual claims, they'll pay it straight away. They'll pay it right away. But once it comes to multiple employees, multiple claims, they tend to hide behind their legal team.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, Teddy, you've been good. Thank you.
My other question for Teddy, and maybe, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but like, do you think that, you could make the contact information for Hawai'i Workers Center available to workers that come in for help through the Department of Labor, so that, I know you're limited as a public employee from, publicizing and doing more public facing advocacy, but, the Workers Center, I think that's what they're envisioning. So do you think, like,
We can
there
hold
can
all
be a
your,
partnership?
what do you call that? We can put your flyers up at our front desk and all of that around our building. The only problem right now with my stuff right now is all of your Zoom meetings happen after business hours, and they're not going to pay me overtime. Technically, this is compensable time.
Well, you're probably exempt, right, Teddy?
Yeah, that's right. He's salaried worker.
But yeah, I think that's a great idea, is to get some of your materials to Teddy's office so that workers who want to pursue different avenues can, and then they can at least find camaraderie and know that, like, they're not alone, and just get educated about, like, how this is a really systemic issue and what they can do to organize around it.
One of our big things with our administrator is she wants to do more outreach during business hours. So I've actually had my Maui investigators go out to they got this place called the Maui Occupational Center and Molokai Occupational Center. They've been going there maybe every other month to do the same thing like this, wage theft seminars over Chapter 387, 388, and all the laws that we cover. Whenever any organization requests for us to do a presentation, we would take it. It's just right now the COVID thing, the social distance thing, so it's most likely going to be video conference time, unless we can guarantee everybody will be social distance at whatever place we go to.
Teddy, do you have cases of undocumented workers who have made the complaint, and how did you deal with that?
So I've had a few, just under 10 cases. I collected all of their money, all in full. The problem that they ran into after is, I don't know how they cash their checks. Because we require the employer to give a pay statement and a paycheck, so we got that, but I don't know if they have their own bank accounts. I don't know if they go to a loan shark or wherever they cash their paychecks. I don't know. What I have been seeing with the undocumented workers is a lot of times their I-9 fails. So the employer withholds their paycheck because they can't verify their I-9. But that all should be fixed and set up before they get hired. So that's why we don't care. If you work, you get paid. We're gonna get it if you don't get paid. That's what we do.
Thank you, everyone. If there's any pressing questions, if not, I think we're at time.
Just to thank you for both of you. Very, very good presentation. It would be very useful for us, especially when the Hawai'i Workers Center is planning to take on this issue, actually, of wage theft. While it is important for us to, as our long-term approach is to help people address their immediate issues, but also at the same time, we want them to get organized. So for the meantime, when we do outreach to some of these people, we would like volunteers actually to help us, especially for those people who have attended this training today. And I think we will be continuing to have this kind of training with along the line of wage theft and other issues. So we will be, we're mainly a volunteer organization, as John had mentioned earlier. We have only one part-time staff and everybody else is volunteer. So we would like to ask for volunteer if we have some cases like this, we can assign you this person to help in this case and follow up. Maybe it will not take that a lot of time, especially in terms of the initial conversation with the person and deepening the investigation of the issue that we need from volunteers, especially those who have attended the training and get familiar of the cases and the law actually. So that's one of the calls that we have, that in order for us to pursue this effectively, we need to have more volunteers, and we will be glad to deepen your training also as we continue to have this kind of training in the near future. So thank you very much for your participation, and thank you, Terry and Reyna, for that very excellent information and presentation that you did.
Thank you, Teddy. Thank you, Reyna.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
Thanks.
guys.